So I got a message for children and parents. I preached the message on husbands. I preached the message on wife. The next thing is about kids. And I guess we need to start with some humor. And there's always a little bit of truth in all jokes. It's what kind of makes them funny. So here's my humor for the day. Raising kids is a walk in the park. Jurassic Park. So I asked my parents if I was adopted. They said, not yet, but we've got an ad out. We're trying our best. Having one child makes you a parent. Having two children makes you a referee. And that can be so true. Parenting, if you think you're going crazy, you're probably doing a good job. So, you know your life has changed when going to the grocery store by yourself is a vacation. So, and that is so true. My wife and I would fight over who would cut the grass, because that would be like 3 hours of no phone, no kids, no just silence cutting the grass. We cut our grass, every other day. We would take turns. Cleaning, and I was wondering how many people don't know who Phyllis Diller is? Two people don't. Let me she was an actress who I thought was a couple hundred years old back. She probably wasn't, but she had, if you have to look her up, she really had a nice hairdo. That's what I remember. Do you guys remember Phyllis? Her hair was like she put her finger in the electric plug. And that was a good hair day for her. So, but Phyllis Diller says, cleaning your house while your kids are still growing up is like shoveling the sidewalk before it stops snowing. So, very profound. At the end of the Old Testament, these are literally the last verses of the Old Testament. And it's interesting. It's a prophecy about the coming of the Lord and the end times. And then God goes silent. We call it the silent years of the Lord. For 400 years, he is silent before the birth of Jesus Christ. And it's the longest period of time that God didn't speak in the scriptures. But the last thing that God says in the Old Testament, which is very interesting, is to parents and children, this kind of prophecy. So he says, see, I will send you the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. So there is a judgment that is going to come that God prophesies about. And he says, verse 6, he will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. And I believe this occurs during the church age, and I'll come back to that in a second. Or else, when that doesn't happen, I'm going to come, the Lord's going to return, and I'm going to strike the land with total destruction. And of course, that's found in Revelation when God pours out his wrath and God's judgment falls on the earth. But during the church age, which is, I believe, this middle section, chapter 6, and it's the Spirit of God that changes parents' hearts and kids' hearts. So when people get filled with the Spirit of the Lord as parents, they suddenly have a supernatural love for their kids. They want the very best for their kids. They're praying for their kids. They're sharing Jesus with their kids, talking about the Lord. And when kids find the Lord, they have a love that is not natural, but suddenly they will have a love for mom and dad that comes from God. And that's the church age. At some point, the church gets raptured out, and God pours out his tribulation. And during the tribulation, we read in the Bible that children will turn in their parents, and parents will turn in their kids, and there will not be any love. And it's as if God says with the Ten Commandments go in order of severity from the worst to the least, and the honoring of your father and mother is even before murder and committing adultery and stealing and lying and covetousness. And God's like, you know, when parents don't love their kids anymore and when kids don't love their parents anymore, when that happens, it's over. It's done. I'm bringing my judgment. I'm coming back. So I want you to keep that in mind. So someone sent me, well, let's look at the verse in Ephesians. Then I'll share with you a picture. So here's the Apostle Paul, and he's saying, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, contrary to the world that is trying to tell kids, don't listen to your parents, don't obey your parents. But God says this is the right thing to do, for children to obey their parents, and this is in the Lord. So if your parents tell you to kill someone, of course you don't listen to them. But I don't know what parent does that, okay? But it's in the Lord. Verse 2, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment. It's the fifth commandment in the 10 commandments. It's the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So fathers are the spiritual ministers of their homes. And I call you the senior pastor, and your wife should be the assistant pastor. And God lays upon the father to make sure that the children are growing up in the instruction and knowledge of the Lord. It's your responsibility as fathers. I know schools should assist you, but it is ultimately your responsibility to make sure your kids learn about God and his word. I say this because I'm going to share something with you, and I'm going to skip this section because I know I don't have time. Someone just sent me this picture last week. This is Robin and I 40 years ago when we first got married. And we're smiling because we don't have kids yet. No, I was kidding. And so I was going to share, but I'm going to skip this section. What I want to share with you, I don't know if you saw on the news that in the state of California, a teacher got fired specifically because she would not lie on her job. California now has a law that if kids are not sure about their sexual identity, and just so you understand, in psychology, all kids go through that. It's like, and it's the job of the parents, not the school, not the government. It's the job of the parents to guide their kids as they wrestle through these issues instead of going, oh, you like playing with dolls? You must be a girl. I mean, it's like, come on. The parents kind of can guide. But in the state of California, if a 10-year-old kid is having trouble and a parent asks a teacher, the teacher is to lie to the parent. And so this Christian teacher said, I can't do that. I'm not going to lie. If a parent directly comes to me and says, is my child, my 12-year-old child, having some identity issues, the teachers will say, no, I don't know anything. I don't know what job requires you to lie. Do any of you work a job that they make you lie? You have to lie in order to keep it? I was thinking, if I was a spy in Russia, I was thinking, I get it. I get why you might want to lie as a spy, okay? But as a school teacher, is this where we're at now? And so she says she won't lie. She got notice from the school district, from the state, that effective the last day in January, 31, 2023, the statement read, based on your religious beliefs, if you follow the 10 Commandments, you cannot be dishonest with parents, you are fired. So I'm like, wow, you can't be a Christian or a moral person and teach in the schools in California. She's in a lawsuit, I hope she wins, on behalf of all people who believe you shouldn't lie. I just like, this is mind-boggling that we're at the point where teachers are told to lie to parents. And again, I want to reaffirm or say to all of you, you are the parents fathers, I think parents have the best insight into their own kids and how to guide them. And the state is taking more and more control over what they want to do with your kids, that God has given you that responsibility. I think we need to pray. We have school teachers in this church, and though it's not quite as bad in Pennsylvania, it is heading there. We need to pray for the teachers that are in the public schools, because it is a nightmare working with kids. I have some articles here. Ask anyone who's worked in some of America's failing public schools, and nearly all of them will tell you the same thing. The biggest problem isn't the quality of the teachers, it's the behavior of the kids. The kids are angry, disruptive, disrespectful kids. Their behavior is out of control. This is not only true in the poor schools in the inner cities, but in the schools in the larger white rural parts of the U.S. And I don't have time, but there's tons of books out that have studied this. So 30 years ago, I remember raising my kids, and, we would discipline, and I think there's a balance. So, I was raised under very authoritative parents. You stepped out of line, you got into trouble. And the other extreme is it's all relationship based, and you make your 5-year-old your best friend. You're not a parent, you're just the kid's best friend. And I think there's a balance between these two realms. Parents are now scared to death to discipline. The kids scare them. The world scares them. And so they're like, there's a balance somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle. And all I can tell you is after 30 years, so the world said, oh no, kids will be a lot better if parents are just their friends and there's no discipline. But we now know that that's not true at all. And that the kids in the United States are going down horribly. And it makes me, the collapse of the authority of the parent. Someone gave me this. I thought this was very, very interesting, very profound. This is the role of parents, but it shows you how it's limited, and kids where you have to make a decision. So a parent can share about life, the abundant life in Jesus Christ, but I cannot live your life for you. A parent can teach information and teach their children how to learn. Ultimately, that's what high school and college should do, is teach you how to be a lifelong learner. But I cannot make you learn. A parent can give their children love, but unfortunately, you can't force them to love you back. A parent can warn their children about the dangers of alcohol and drugs and sex. But I cannot, as a parent, make you say no. The Bible tells us in Titus that it is the power of the Spirit of God that enables an individual to say no to things that are wrong. I say this because I am sick about what's happening to our young people. So it just came out this last week that in 2021, 107,000 young people died of drug overdose. I didn't say 107. I said 107,000 young people died from drug overdose. 70% of this from fentanyl and opioids, which I think is like the same thing. If you put in suicide and everything else, it goes up to like 240,000 young people. And by the way, this statistic, it isn't out for 2022 yet, but it's been growing at the rate of 20% a year. I am not kidding. It is sickening what is happening with the young people. And think about this. We're at over 100,000 are literally dying from drugs every year in the United States. And we think we're doing a good job. And again, the kids don't have the power. They're being peer pressured by their friends that are saying, hey, these drugs are so good. Drinking is so good. Cutting it, whatever. And the kids, because they don't have the Lord, do not have the power to say, no, I don't do drugs. No, I'm not going to steal. No, I'm not going to do that. You know, they don't have the power, and they give in to their death, to their being. Well, I'll come back more on this. I can tell you about lofty goals, but I cannot achieve them for you. I can teach you kindness, but I cannot make you kind. I can take you to church, but I cannot make you believe. I can show you faith in Jesus, but I cannot make you believe in him, put your trust in him. So let's look at this verse for a second, and let's dissect it a little bit. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. So the commandment says honor your father and mother. But to honor someone is to obey them. So when you honor your boss, you obey your boss. Of course, not doing something wrong. When you honor someone, you follow their leadership and their guidance. So when children honor their parents, they show that by obeying their parents in the Lord. And it's the first commandment. There's like 670 commandments in the Old Testament. Not very many of them have a promise connected to them, but this fifth commandment does. It has a promise. God says, you know what? I'm a heavenly Father. I have a heavenly Son, eternal Son. I know what relationship is like. So I want to put a promise with this. And I can see all the angels. Oh, yeah, what are you going to do? And God says, here's the best promise I can think of. And literally, there's two parts to this promise. One is that you're going to be happy. And then so it kind of comes out in the verse. It goes well with you and you enjoy. So you'll have a happy life. Most kids today do not have a happy life. It's incredible that the depression and the anxiety and so you'll have a happy life and you'll have a long life. And some theologians point out that there's a double blessing here. That this is not only talking about this lifetime, but in the life to come as well. Because it turns out that kids that obey their parents, that honor their parents, are also the same kids that are most likely to give their heart to the Lord. Because when they love their parents and they're interconnected, and so they will wind up having what I call eternal, because in the future, after God destroys this world, he's going to build a new heaven and a new earth. So for the kids that honor their parents, they will give their heart to the Lord, and they will enjoy a long life for eternity in the new heavens and the new earth. I was going to share you some Old Testament teaching on the honoring of parents. So just very quick, it's just emphasizing how important God always considered this fifth commandment. Anyone who attacks their father and mother is to be put to death. That's what God says. Look, I think honoring your parents is so important. You curse them, Now, I don't know of any story in the Old Testament where parents actually did do this, okay? But nevertheless, God is trying to emphasize, be careful how you talk to your parents. Leviticus 29, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death because they've cursed their father and mother. Their blood is on their own head. In Deuteronomy 21, 18 to 21, if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to church. Oh boy, at the gate of his, that's why I'm glad we don't do this. Because I'm like, ugh. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All of Israel will hear of it, and you'll be afraid. All you have to do is do this with one teenager, and the whole world will hear. But I'm just like, boy, am I glad I'm not under Old Testament days and the grace of God. However, you do understand that the Lord is like, this is how serious I take this command. Now, Proverbs 30 has an interesting, and again, it's a prophetic verse that is talking into the future. And the only question is, are we there? And he says, there is a generation. So at some point, through time and through history, a generation will come that they curse their father and bless not their mother. What does bless mean? To bless, to make happy. So there's going to be a generation of kids that are born that care less about dad, and they don't care about making their mother happy. There is a generation, verse 12, that they will be pure in their own eyes, and yet are not washed from their filthiness. So there'll be a generation that will grow up that will be so arrogant, and they will be pure in their own eyes. They don't need a savior. They're not interested. And they view their parents, because no parent is perfect, they will view themselves as, better than their parents, and that they don't need a savior. They don't need the forgiveness of their sins like their parents have. There is a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There's a generation whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor off the earth. It fits with Malachi, the last verses of God in the Old Testament, when he says he will turn the hearts of the parents to the children and the hearts of the children to the parents, or else, when that comes to an end, I'm going to come and strike the land with total destruction. So because I've been sharing this, that this is the first generation, that's this younger generation that's 25 and under. It's the first time in the history of the country, and maybe even the world, where over 40% of the generation is saying, we don't want God. We're not interested in God. And they also have a very bad attitude towards their parents. And they view themselves as high and mighty, and they don't need God, they don't need a savior, they don't need forgiveness of their sins, although their parents are as sinful, guilty as can be. Now, this truth is not only taught in the Old Testament, but when you come to the New Testament, Romans chapter 1 talks about the slow depravity of the world. And we read, furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. In the United States, this is the hugest gap of, it was 90% believed in God to now suddenly at least 40% of the younger generation said, there's no God, we're not interested in God, we don't care about God, we don't want to learn about God. And I think to myself, what happens with the next generation? If we're at 40% saying there's no God, I'm like, is the next generation going to be 80% going, no God? I'm not. But it's like, wow, we are there. So God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. So you have this sign when you see children not obeying their parents. And what's interesting, it says they have no understanding of true wisdom, and they have no fidelity, no loyalty to their parents. I cannot tell you how many parents are heartbroken. Their kids turn 18, and they're like, goodbye, Dad, Mom, not interested in you. I am free, and there's no fidelity. There's no loyalty. It says that there's no love. It's incredible how kids today just cut off their parents. I don't care that you raised me. I don't care you gave me birth. I don't care what you did for me for 18 years. I have no loyalty to you. I have no love for you. I think you're a hypocrite. I think you are rotten, and I'm glad I have my life totally put together, But it's kind of like, wow, there's no mercy. See, the ability to forgive comes from God. And parents aren't perfect. And when kids cannot forgive, they don't know the Lord, they haven't experienced forgiveness of their own sins, they don't forgive their parents. Dad, you did this to me when I was 13 years old. Mom, you did this to me. And because they haven't experienced forgiveness for themselves, they do not have any mercy for their parents. They throw their parents under the bus. And I'm telling you, you read any book on child psychology today and what's going on, I'm telling you, the parents are being thrown under the bus. And the world is encouraging it, and Satan loves destroying the bond between parents and kids. And he's doing an amazing job. 2 Timothy says the same thing, but mark this, there'll be terrible times in the last days, and you'll see one of the descriptions is they're disobedient to their parents. So come with me to Luke chapter 2. And let me share the one story of Jesus. There's only one story of Jesus between his birth and when he started his ministry at 30 years old. One story, but God tells us everything we need to know in that one story. So Luke chapter 2, Joseph and Mary have dedicated Jesus to the Lord at the temple. And verse 39, when Joseph and Mary, everyone there in Luke 2:39, when Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child, Jesus, grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom. I say he went to Sunday school, and the grace of God was on him. So then here's the one story. Every year, verse 41, every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. I find this interesting because there's religions out there that believe that Joseph was an old person when he was married to Mary, and they never had relationships. And as soon as Mary gave birth to Jesus, Joseph dies and goes off the scene. But the scriptures tell us that Joseph and Mary had at least 6 more kids. And I know for a fact that Joseph is still alive 12 years later after Jesus is born, because they're going to Jerusalem for the Passover every year. And so they go. Jesus is 12 years old. And you know the story. They go, and then they leave with all the relatives, and Mary thinks Jesus is with that cousin, and Joseph thinks Jesus is with that. And in a day, they find out, hey, where's Jesus? Okay, so they start searching for him. So verse 46, after 3 days, they found him. So I just think it's funny. Verse 45, when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. Okay, so they're looking all over for Jesus. And this is Toomey translation. They were looking for Jesus in the bar. Is he drinking? Now, I have to back up. You know, at the age of 12 is the age of accountability. And in Bible times, and actually for most of history, at 12 years old, you were an adult. Most of the people in time got married at 14 to 16 years old. They were working. In the time of Jesus, if you lived to 35, you were old, okay? So they were like, maybe he's in the bars. Or maybe he's hanging out with bad friends. Maybe he's getting in trouble. Maybe he's in jail. They're looking for him, okay? And then finally, where do they find him? All right, they find him at church. Okay, they find him at the temple. Verse 46, after 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "You were searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house? Didn't you know I'd be in church?" So let me tell you, psychologists tell us that it is at the age of 12, roughly. Now, if someone's super mature, they make a decision at 10. If someone's a little bit immature, it might be at 14. But roughly, psychologists tell us that at the age of 12, a child, let's call them a young adult, is actually making their own decisions and their own belief in their mind. So you have this kind of influence until they're 12 years old. And then I guarantee you, at 12, your sons and daughters have made a decision in their mind. They've made a decision whether they're going to follow God or not. They've made a decision whether they're going to be in the scriptures or not. They made a decision whether they want to live a right life. You will know you'll know that they've made a decision for God when they want to go to church. You know, That's what Jesus says. Hey, I don't know why you're searching for me. I've made a decision at 12 to worship God, to be at the temple, to learn about him. And I know parents, I don't think parents are totally fooled, but you can bring your kid to church through their teen years, but you are well aware whether they have made that own decision themselves and go, of course, Dad and Mom, I want to go to church. Of course, I want to go to youth group. Of course, I want to learn the scriptures. Or whether you're just dragging your kids and they're like, well, I got to do it because I'm at home and I don't have any other choice. And so I may as well make the best of it. I don't really want to go. I have really no interest in God. I have no interest in following him. But I'm going to put on a charade until I turn 18 and get out of here. And then I'm going to do my own thing and toss everyone under, the bus. But kids, I read enough books in psychology to know you've made a decision. You're making a decision in your life, whether you're fooling your parents or not. I hope it's for God. I hope it's for Jesus. Because if it is, there's a great promise for you that you will enjoy life. You won't need drugs and alcohol, and you won't need the junk of the world. You will enjoy life and you'll have a long life. But you got a small window to make that. So they find Jesus at the temple. Look at verse 51. Now this is interesting. Jesus is the Son of God. He's perfect, right? Is the parents of Jesus perfect? No. Okay? But look at what it says in verse 51. Then he went down to Nazareth with his parents and was what? Obedient to them. So there it is. Jesus makes a decision at 12. I'm going to follow God. Of course I'm going to go to the temple, to church. And it's evidenced by the Son of God himself saying, I'm going to obey. I'm going to honor my father and mother, even though I'm an adult and I'm the Son of God. I'm going to set the example and be obedient to my parents. And then it closes out with, he grew, let's see, Luke 2. Oh, I lost my spot. Hold on. Verse 52, and Jesus grew, and there's 4 areas that you grow in. Wisdom of God, stature physically, favor with God and man. You should be learning from 12 to 18 to grow in favor with men and women. You should be learning, and by the way, this skill is not being learned by 12 to 18-year-olds. You should be learning at that age how to get along with different personalities of different people. You should be learning. The reason that kids are not learning this anymore is because we don't hang out together. Everything's on social media. So kids are not learning, how do you get along with older people? How do you get along with middle-aged people? How do you get along with a tough boss? How do you get along with women? How do you get along with girls? It's a skill that you learn, that Jesus learned. He learned how to get favor. You can learn how to get along with people, even if they don't believe what you believe, okay? And then he grew in favor with God. Yesterday, we had Dr. Carl, thank you ever so much. We had a great men's shoulder-to-shoulder rally. And, I mean, there was like, and I know, Carl, have you survived? A lot of work goes on behind the scenes, obviously, to make it happen. And Carl, thank you ever so much. Because I believe, everyone that I talked to, you could just watch that the Lord was speaking and moving upon all the men and young men there. There was a guy all by himself. So at the beginning of the service, I went up to him and said, hey, I'm Pastor Joe. And he gave me his name. I said, what do you do? And he says, I'm a psychiatrist. And I went, oh. I said, my first 4 years was pre-med, and I liked psychology. But then the Lord led me into ministry. And he went, oh, well, really the same thing kind of was happening in my life. I am a Christian, and I finished my pre-med, and I was really debating whether to become a doctor or whether to go into ministry. But I talked to good counsel, and they said, I'm gifted, and to and to become a doctor, psychiatrist. So I said, oh, that's neat. And he has a practice in the area, and he's very, very busy. He has other people working under him. And he goes to me, my number one clientele is children, kids and teens. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So then the service started. But I was thinking to myself in my mind, I'm preaching on children tomorrow. This was yesterday, right? So I'm like, I got this sermon ready, and I'm preaching on children. And I mean, here's an expert. This is what he does for a living, and he's a Christian. So I was like, actually, through the service, I went up to him. I want to talk to you afterwards. So after it was all over, we got together, and I said, look, I'm preaching, believe it or not, on children tomorrow. What advice do you have for me? And it was interesting. He didn't even have to think very long. He says, oh, I can tell you exactly what it is. He says, you have to warn parents about social media. He says, it's destroying the kids. And that's why they're coming. And that's why I have more business than I know what to do with. Social media is destroying kids. And so I'm not kidding. I turned this sermon in like 3-4 days ago. I have to turn it in early. And my very last slide was that kids are spending around 90 hours a week on their devices, contributing to a myriad of problems which include a lack of social and communication skills, along with anxiety and depression. The iPhones are raising our kids. IA is raising our kids. And in talking to him, depression, anxiety, bullying, destruction of self-esteem, messing up kids' minds, turning them from God, leading to drugs, I mean, it's like, I can't believe. And so I got to talking like, I said to him, well, can you take the phones away? And he's like, parents just need to figure out how to have boundaries. But and I was like, yeah, I get it. I see the kids are on their phones nonstop all the time. And it is so changed. And he's like, yeah, I know. And so I'm just sharing with you, here's the problem, and it's only going to get worse. And literally, the IA is controlling through social media, TikTok, and all this other stuff. They literally are training and teaching your kids what to believe, what to practice, and it isn't godly. It isn't for their health. It's destroying them. And don't ask me what the answer is, but you're giving him lots of business. And he can't, Let's look to the Lord. Father, I pray for all the parents to give them wisdom to be great moms and dads to their children, and to guide and work with them through the complexities of growing up in 2023. And help them to be parents, not just, they can be best friends with their kids when they're 30 years old, but help them to be good dads and moms, and to be good role models, and to teach them about their walk with the Lord. And Lord, I pray for all the kids. I pray that they would, within their hearts, make a decision to love you with their whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. And that it will be evident by how they bless and honor their father and mother in their life. That they would get to experience this promise that it will go well with them. They will not die of overdose. They will not take their life. It will go well with them, and they will live a long life. So move upon the kids. Speak to their hearts that they would make a decision for Jesus, for themselves. Bless us, fill us with your Spirit. In your name we pray. Amen.